My name's Karl. If we haven't met, my family and I have been here for over 2 years, I think, now at this point. We had the three kids, and we're all the crazy ones. If you're curious what was going on, Melanie, my wife, isn't here today, so that's what's going on. LA Voice is a big event this weekend, and in true Baker planning fashion, she's been gone for 3 days, and so we're here. We made it, and I welcome your prayers as I preach. And thank you, Sue, for holding baby Wrigley for us. I really am grateful for the opportunity to share some thoughts and some insights about our passage for the month. I really love this idea of spending a month with the passage. The Bible is so rich and complex that it takes a lifetime and more to really delve into it. But there's also this sense of even small passages, 24 verses, we can kind of sit with and settle in and see what just those verses have to offer us for a month. I really appreciated last week's group discussion. If you were here, we spent some time in groups just sharing insights, questions, thoughts, curiosities that come to mind when we read this passage. And so I hope some of the questions about this text can be explored today. I don't presume that all will be. But more so, I hope that I'm not as much providing answers, but hoping to carry the torch forward, hoping to keep the ball rolling, hoping to keep the conversation going as we look at this text for another couple weeks. As we begin any story in the Gospel of John, where this story is found, I find it important to ground ourselves in the larger purpose of why did John write this account of Jesus? Why did John tell these stories? Why did he make the choices he made? What is the larger sort of meta narrative? What is the theme that John the writer is always working towards in the passage? Thankfully, at the end of the Gospel of John, in chapter 20, verse 31, says, "But these are written so that you may continue to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and through believing you may have life in his name." So this grounding purpose can help us sort of explore and focus our attention. Maybe these are ideas that you can keep in mind as we read this story again and again of how does this story help us further continue to, one, know that Jesus is God, and two, experience new life. So John's saying all these stories that I've written, all these things that I have recorded and put together are to remind us that Jesus is God, and through Jesus, new life is possible. So we open the story and it talks about the Pharisees hearing Jesus baptizing more disciples than John. And although it wasn't actually Jesus baptizing, he decided to leave the area. So this opening sentence, this opening idea of the story is that Jesus, through his disciples, which isn't that nice, if we could make Jesus look bad because of what we did, is causing a stir in the community. The work of Jesus of baptism, this rebel rouser, instigator, is causing a stir with where he was. The work of his baptism was making Pharisees upset, this group of powerful religious Jewish leaders. And the work of baptism was really bothering them. And so the question is why? It was common practice for Jewish communities to have ceremonial washings, cleansings. That was a common practice. But what Jesus seems to be performing and his disciples are performing was seen as rather initiatory baptisms. It wasn't just a ceremonial washing, but this stepping into something new, initiating into maybe a new sect, a new way, not a continuation of what already was happening, but saying, no, this is something brand new. And so that is what sort of irked the Pharisees and say, no, like continue what we're doing. Why are you transitioning? Why are you taking in a new direction? So the story opens though with this theme of newness, of freshness, of breaking from the old patterns and transitions and embracing something new and mysterious. That is the theme that sort of sets up the story of the Samaritan woman. And this is a continued pattern in John's gospel, this theme. There exists a number of stories where the actions of Jesus create controversy and then contribute to this revealing of his divine nature. And then people are faced with a choice. There's a pattern we see where Jesus creates a stir and then someone is faced with, what do I do with this information? Just before this story, Jesus speaks with a man named Nicodemus, a Jewish ruler, a religious leader, about being born again through water and the Spirit, revealing this mysterious newness, emergence of a new movement of God. The connection with water in the Nicodemus story should also linger on us as the reader as we step into the encounter at the water at the well with the woman in John 4. And how interesting is it that in John 3, Nicodemus, a Jewish male religious leader, struggles with the understanding of new birth, if you're familiar with the story, while the Samaritan outcast woman in John 4 receives fully the words of living water. So that's some backstory, some setup to the story of this woman in Samaria. And so Katerina set up a little bit. Well, what's the deal with Samaria? Why is it a big deal that Jesus went through Samaria instead of around Samaria? Why does the woman react and say, "Why would you, a Jew, ask me, a Samaritan, for water?" It's presented to us that Jesus does to seem to break significant social and cultural barriers as he goes into this encounter. Samaria might clue our minds into another Jesus story, if you're familiar with the Good Samaritan, as commonly known, where the hero of the story is not the Jewish leaders, the expected people, but is an unexpected Samaritan. Maybe we can start to wonder about reversals and challenging assumptions as we come into this story. Samaria has a rich and complex history as a region and a people. Samaritans were often viewed with contempt by Jews due to historical rivalries, due to religious differences, and political conflicts. So we may not have a grasp for what that could be like. Political differences, historical differences, religious differences. Maybe we can. Samaria is the capital in early Old Testament of the northern kingdom of Israel, and it's marked by this contentious relationship with Judah. And so this is a long-standing rivalry, something that's been happening for a long time. And there was an opposition to the Jerusalem temple being reconstructed and different religious practices that are happening there. Later, after a conquest, the region of Samaria became this sort of melting pot of cultures as Assyrians moved in and sort of intermingled. And so the language of purity, of you're not real Jews, you're not real worshipers, can sort of be here in the language and the understanding. And then in about maybe 100 years, 200 years before the time of Jesus, you have someone, a high priest and ruler of Jews, going into Samaria and destroying the capital city and destroying their temple right there, close to this well, close to Mount Gerizim, which is referenced in the story. So it's not surprising then that these groups have remained bitter enemies with centuries of backstory, remain bitter enemies when a couple hundred years later, there's fresh blood has been spilled. And so that is all the setting of John 4. That's all the setting of why it seems so stark for her that Jesus, a Jew, is there with her at the well. And so further, we're also clued into Jesus arriving at Jacob's well. What's that significance? Is it significant? Of course it's significant. It wouldn't be said if it wasn't. So there's connections in history and traditions attached to this well. And of course, Jesus was going to tap into all the meanings there. This well is traditionally connected to Jacob, the son of Isaac, the son of Abraham, the people that are referenced in Genesis that sort of established the Jewish faith. Jacob is said in Genesis 33 to have bought land in Shechem in this area, and later which becomes known as Samaria. This well is actually seemingly not mentioned in the Old Testament. This site, though, has become significant and was significant for both Jews and Samaritans of the time due to its traditional connection to Jacob, this founder of their cultures and faith. But also, we do hear Jacob and a well. There be a connection for us to Genesis 24, where Jacob, this Jacob well, same Jacob, meets his wife Rachel at a well. Just like his father met Rebecca, his mom, at a well. And so these repeated settings, which some scholars call biblical type scenes, are clues that flag us and point us to, hey, something's happening here. There's larger themes and meanings. We shouldn't be surprised maybe in this story if marriages come up. It's a place at a well, referencing Jacob. Maybe let's start thinking about marriages. Today, this site where the well is known as Jacob's Wells Greek Orthodox Church. It's located in occupied West Bank, Palestine, sitting across from the Balata Palestinian refugee camp, which was established in 1950. So maybe Jesus was tapping some significance of that time, but it also seems like maybe there's some significance of this story for us today with all that's happening still currently between two divided people, divided religions, divided cultures. So Jesus then meets the woman. There's this interaction. Why are you talking to me? And he has this way of speaking multiple meanings at once. He references living water, almost toying with language, almost toying with space. And now, living water is not inherently the spiritual term. Living water is an idiom that means spring water or fresh water, water that's flowing, water that's moving. This kind of water is viewed by many cultures as holy, and also because of its safety. Water that's moving quick enough is able to be drunk. There's a sense of that's a good thing, and so you can sort of see why the woman was like, you have living water, you have moving water, like that is going to make my life way easier. I don't have to like worry about disease. I don't have to worry about coming back. It's going to keep flowing and flowing. Where I grew up in the mountains of central Pennsylvania, there was roadside springs where I don't know if anyone's ever seen this, but there's like a pipe coming out of the mountain, and you can go up and fill up your bottle of water and take a drink, keep moving. Um, they've had some disease come from those because they're not as safe as they thought. But there's this sense of the roadside spring. The spring is flowing. Over on the west side, where Baker family we've just moved, there's a sacred Tongva spring that's still flowing in our neighborhood, and me and the boys went and saw it. But there's this sense of holiness, of beauty, of wonder, of cleanness to this idea of living water. And so I don't think that the woman is sort of like missing the point. He's almost sort of setting her up in a way of saying, no, this is a beautiful thing, and I'm sort of building some anticipation. But Jesus then takes that idea of living water, of flowing water, of a spring, and sort of builds and expands, pulling on every possible meaning. He's making this declaration of the grandness and magnitude of God in a dry and parched land. Jesus is the water that gives life. In a world gone violent and hostile, he brings hope and life. Because what is life without water? There's a reason water is such a sacred theme in our tradition and so many cultures and traditions. Without water, we cannot stay clean. We cannot survive. Water is movement. Water is action, restoration. Water is transportation, hope, salvation, nourishment. Water is life. So Jesus says, I am the water, and I have it to offer. Look, I'm doing something new, and all that water is and can be, water that is tangible, water that is spiritual, water that is deeper, water that is grander, water that is beyond our imagination. I am, and I can give to you, Jesus says. You want living spring water? Of course you do. But what if I can give water that is alive, that can flow into every place of death, sadness, violence, selfishness, evil, and bubble up life and abundance and hope? And the woman says, please, please give me this water. But then Jesus makes this interesting turn, makes an unexpected and maybe not so unexpected turn to discuss the woman and herself and her marital status. It's like, oh, here comes the marriage portion of being at a well. And this section is very important. I want to be clear about what I think it is and what is not happening in this section. I believe that this section can and has been used to justify harsh talk, particularly towards women. I think this section can and has been used to shame people's sexuality and history. I believe I can be so bold as though to say it's not what we as a community aspire to do. We're aspiring to practice our faith and have conviction, but shame and victim blaming is not consistent with the way of Jesus. So that is not what this passage is doing. So what is happening? Why is this multiple marriages of a Samaritan woman brought up at a well with Jesus? I think the multiple marriages of this woman likely reflects the social and cultural dynamics of her life and the community rather than a personal moral failure. In the patriarchal society that she found herself, women had limited control over marriage and divorce. Arranged by their father, the husband sent her away. There wasn't a whole lot of choice in the matter for her to have 5 husbands. Practices like Levirate marriages, which are referenced in the Old Testament, where a widow marries her deceased husband's brother, could be at play here. The high value placed on childbearing, and we don't know her ability or inability to have children, could have been reason for her to be sent away to the next house over. Marriage could have been a form of survival for her. Challenging thing to be a widow, to be single, and a woman for her and her community. Jesus rather offers this compassionate approach, engaging her without condemnation. I don't see any condemnation of her in this passage. He emphasizes his understanding of her situation, challenges the societal judgments, highlights his inclusive nature of her. Jesus is not shaming her, but highlighting his life complexity. I need that. Maybe you need that too, that we need less shame and more understanding that life is complex. And there's a lot of things we've done, there's a lot of things that have been done to us that make life hard. And this shift, those in this conversation, serves as a pivotal shift. Yes, one, it reveals to the woman that Jesus is a prophet. How else would he know this? This man at a well that she found, how else would he know this besides him being a prophet? But it also shares the knowledge that she is clued into the spiritual implications of this conversation. She's connecting this to the previously mentioned themes of marriages and wells. I think Jesus is opening the door for a conversation about marriage, about unity, about connections, about new relationships. By talking about marriages and the complex nature of life and differences, I think he's opening the door saying, maybe there's newness, maybe there's unity, maybe two things that seem opposite can actually be brought together. And so the conversation shifts to the true nature of worship. So what is worship about? Worship for Samaritans and Jews being tied to space, to geographical location. And then the debate of which space is correct. Again, there's all these echoes that I think we have within our community today. Which space is better than what other spaces? And Jesus then takes these squabbles and differences and does what Jesus seems to do in any space of disunity. He elevates the thinking. He unifies the differences and calls us to listen into a higher space of beauty not yet experienced. And Jesus takes these differences and says, what if we raised it up? What if we brought it together? What if something new was born out of this moment? From my understanding, I think Jesus' entire discourse about location and spirit and truth is that God is far greater than we can imagine. God is with you. God is with me. God is here. God is there. God is spirit, and spirit cannot be contained in a mountain or a box or a statement or a particular presentation of facts. God is love, and love holds no bounds. God is expansive and beautiful, and where God has found justice and hope and healing can be found. God is the spirit and life and water that flows between and moves us all. And so we must worship God in spirit, in beauty and expansiveness. And we must also worship God in truth, in our truth, in the place where we've all found ourselves, in the way we've been given, in the tradition we have, in the time and location and history and stories that we exist and move within. We worship God in a place and time, but we also worship God in expansion and boundlessness and mystery, to do both. So this both and, this beautiful unification of differences, this type of marriage unification that Jesus is referencing here in John 4. Here at a well with, sadly, an unnamed woman. In the middle of the day, Jesus sits thirsty and tired. In this very human moment, Jesus takes the opportunity to connect with all things, all people who have ever been thirsty and tired, and remind them that God is doing a new thing. God has revealed in Jesus, the one who is proclaiming that all things have been made new. He has arrived, he is arriving, he will arrive again. And in this one called Jesus, the way of those who follow Jesus, there is life and life abundant. So the question is Jesus truly God if he doesn't make life and life abundant known? Is Jesus God if he doesn't go into the land of others? Is Jesus God if he doesn't welcome the outcast and the ignored? Is Jesus God if he doesn't stir up an imagination for unity and harmony amongst differences? Is Jesus God if he doesn't use the significance of the places and the people around him to ground us in a more beautiful and divine reality? And for us, can we claim to be followers of this way if we don't do likewise? So may we be people who make life abundantly known. who go through the land of the others, who welcome the outcast and the ignored, who stir up an imagination for unity and harmony among differences. May we be people who use the significance of our community, our cultures, our traditions as a source of grounding for a more beautiful and divine reality for all. Amen.